Did Hollywood's censorship system nearly collapse in the 1940s? While we remember this decade for patriotic war films and film noir, behind the scenes, a secret battle between daring filmmakers and moral guardians. Several directors risked their entire careers with controversial content so shocking that major theater chains refused to show their work, and one film was even burned by court order. Number 15. The Outlaw, 1943. Howard Hughes wasn't just an aviation genius with billions to burn. He was a Hollywood maverick obsessed with pushing boundaries until they broke. The Outlaw starred Jane Russell in her film debut, and Hughes' marketing campaign focused almost entirely on Russell's physique, with provocative posters that had church groups immediately up in arms. The film itself was a Western loosely based on the friendship between Billy the Kid and Doc Holliday, but nobody was talking about the plot. What made The Outlaw truly notorious was Hughes' engineering background coming into play in the most unexpected way. Dissatisfied with how conventional bras shaped Russell's silhouette on camera, he literally designed a new seamless cantilevered bra using airplane technology principles to create the desired effect. Russell later revealed she never actually wore the contraption during filming, calling it ridiculous and too uncomfortable, secretly substituting her own undergarments instead, a fact Hughes never discovered. The film was completed in 1941, but the Motion Picture Production Code refused to approve it, keeping it shelved for years. Never one to surrender, Hughes orchestrated limited releases in 1943, then withdrew it again for more editing, before a wider 1946 release. Even then, the film was banned in numerous cities, with the Catholic Legion of Decency condemning it as indecent and morally objectionable. Film critic Bosley Crowther of the New York Times dismissed it as a ridiculous picture with conspicuously unprofessional acting, but audiences flocked to see what all the controversy was about. The film ultimately grossed over $5 million, an enormous sum for the era. The publicity battle became a turning point in Hollywood censorship, with Hughes directly challenging the Production Code Administration's authority and winning in the court of public opinion. The film's success demonstrated that American audiences had appetites beyond what moral guardians deemed appropriate, beginning a slow erosion of censorship power that would continue for decades. Number 14. The Miracle of Morgan's Creek, 1944. Preston Sturges pulled off the impossible with this comedy that somehow slipped past censors, with a plot about an unwed mother who can't remember which soldier she married during a night of wild partying. The film starred Betty Hutton as Trudy Cockenlocker. Yes, that last name was deliberately risque, a small-town girl who discovers she's pregnant after a farewell party for troops heading overseas, but can't remember any details about the father or whether she actually got married. The genius of Sturges was his ability to wrap deeply controversial content in enough layers of screwball comedy that censors couldn't pinpoint exactly how to object. The film never explicitly mentions pregnancy, instead using the euphemism condition. The miraculous ending, where Trudy gives birth to sextuplets and the government decides her marriage must be valid, was so over-the-top absurd that it distracted from the fundamental moral issues at play. Behind the scenes, Paramount executives were terrified of the potential backlash. Studio head Buddy DeSilva reportedly told Sturges, "You can't put this in a picture. It'll never get by the Hayes office." To which Sturges allegedly replied, "That's a matter of approach, old bean." Sturges submitted multiple fake scripts to the censors with exaggerated objectionable content, then presented his actual script as a toned-down version. Remarkably, the film received positive reviews from critics who appreciated its satirical brilliance. The New York Times called it audacious, while Time magazine praised it as an almost inspired combination of slapstick and satire. The Catholic Legion of Decency, surprisingly, gave it only a B rating rather than condemning it outright. Filmmaker Billy Wilder later called it a masterpiece of indirection, noting how Sturges had smuggled contraband material past the guards. The film's box office success proved audiences were ready for more mature themes even in the conservative wartime environment. Sturges had effectively pulled off one of the greatest pranks in film history, making a movie about topics that were explicitly forbidden and getting away with it. Number 13. Mom and Dad, 1945. This exploitation film masquerading as educational content became one of the most profitable independent productions ever made. spawning nationwide controversy with its graphic childbirth footage. Producer Kroger Babb created a roadshow sensation with this film about a young woman who becomes pregnant after a date with a pilot who dies before she can tell him. The story was just a thin wrapper for the film's real purpose, showing explicit educational footage about reproduction and childbirth. Babb's marketing genius transformed this low-budget film into a cultural phenomenon. He hired educational advisors who were actually carnival barkers to deliver lectures during intermission, selling educational booklets with titles like Man and Woman for additional profit. Screenings were strictly segregated by gender, with men and women seeing the film at different times, a restriction that only heightened public curiosity. The most outrageous aspect of the production was Babb's guerrilla marketing tactics. He would arrive in small towns days before screenings to plant fake controversy, sometimes paying local ministers to condemn the film from their pulpits or bribing local officials to threaten a ban that his lawyers would then heroically overturn. In some locations, he hired actors to pose as protesters or even fake nurses to stand by in case audience members fainted from shock. Critics were uniformly appalled, with Variety calling it a cheap exploitation film. Yet, Mom and Dad became one of the highest-grossing films of the decade, earning an estimated $63 million from a $65,000 investment by traveling from town to town for years. The film played continuously somewhere in America until the 1970s, often returning to the same towns multiple times with slightly different titles. The film was officially condemned by the Catholic Legion of Decency and banned in many cities, but court rulings often protected it on educational grounds. Babb boasted that the film had been banned in more places than any film ever made, a claim he used as a selling point. Film historian Eric Schaefer later called it the Trojan horse of sex education, noting how it slipped explicit content past censors through its educational pretense. Mom and Dad remains a remarkable example of how exploitation films found ways to circumvent the rigid production code through independent distribution. Number 12. Duel in the Sun, 1946. David O. Selznick's Western epic was so steamy it was nicknamed Lust in the Dust by outraged critics. Following his success with Gone with the Wind, Selznick poured a then astronomical $6 million into this Technicolor saga starring Jennifer Jones as Pearl Chavez, a half-Native American woman caught between two brothers on a Texas cattle ranch. The film's themes of forbidden passion, racism, and violence pushed boundaries in ways that shocked 1940s audiences. The film's most controversial scene featured Peck's villainous character and Pearl engaging in a passionate encounter amid desert rocks, intensely suggestive for its era. The Production Code Administration demanded numerous cuts, but Selznick fought back, arguing that his status as producer of Gone with the Wind should give him more leeway. He eventually made some edits, but retained much of the film's sensuality. Behind the scenes, the production was plagued by Selznick's obsession with Jones, causing him to shoot excessive footage of her. Original director King Vidor eventually quit in frustration, forcing Selznick to bring in several uncredited directors to complete various sequences. The final cut ran nearly 2.5 hours, with production delays and Selznick's perfectionism driving the budget to nearly twice its original estimate. Religious groups across America condemned the film, with the Catholic Legion of Decency giving it a C rating. Many theater chains refused to show it, while others created edited for local standards versions. Martin Quigley, a prominent Catholic publisher and co-author of the Production Code, called it a new low in Hollywood morals and demanded sanctions against Selznick. Despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, the film was a commercial success, grossing over $20 million. Critics were divided, with the New York Times calling it a seething tragedy of unbridled passions, while others dismissed it as overblown melodrama. Film scholar Thomas Schatz later called it the most sexually charged mainstream Hollywood film of its era, noting how it tested the limits of the production code system. The film's excessive, almost operatic approach to forbidden passion set the stage for the more adult westerns that would emerge in the 1950s. Number 11. The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, 1946. This film noir pushed the envelope with its dark portrayal of murder, blackmail, and psychological manipulation, featuring a young Kirk Douglas in his film debut. The story centers on Martha Ivers, who, as a child, accidentally kills her abusive aunt during a storm. The murder is witnessed by Walter O'Neill, whose father helps cover up the crime. Years later, Martha has married Walter and controls the town's industrial empire, but lives in fear of her secret being exposed when childhood friend Sam Masterson, Van Heflin, returns. What made the film particularly controversial was its unflinching portrayal of a loveless, manipulative marriage where Martha dominates the alcoholic, weak-willed Walter. Their relationship had disturbing psychological undertones rarely seen in 1940s cinema. The film also implied Martha used both money and physical relations to maintain control over Walter and ensure his silence about the murder, content that pushed the boundaries of the production code. The most shocking aspect was the film's moral ambiguity. Unlike most films of the era where wrongdoers were clearly punished, Martha Ivers presented complex characters whose fates seemed dictated by psychological forces rather than simple justice. The ending, where Martha and Walter both die in what appears to be a murder-suicide, was considered unusually bleak, even for film noir. Director Lewis Milestone fought with producers over the film's dark tone, reportedly saying, "This isn't just a crime picture, it's a study in pathological behavior." The Production Code Administration demanded several script revisions to tone down the psychological and physical relationship between Martha and Walter, though much of the subtext remained intact through the actors' performances. Critics recognized the film's power, with The Hollywood Reporter praising it as a study in evil that is fascinating to watch. Audiences were simultaneously attracted and disturbed by its psychological complexity. Though not a blockbuster, the film performed well and established Kirk Douglas as a serious dramatic actor, despite his unsympathetic role. Film historian Eddie Mueller later called it one of the most psychologically complex films of the 1940s, noting how it anticipated the more mature themes that would dominate Hollywood in the 1950s. The film demonstrated that audiences could handle morally complex narratives where characters weren't simply good or evil, but psychologically damaged. A revolutionary concept for 1940s mainstream cinema. Number 10. The Postman Always Rings Twice, 1946. James M. Cain's notoriously steamy novel finally reached screens after being considered unfilmable for years, with censors blocking multiple adaptation attempts throughout the 1930s. This film noir classic starred John Garfield as drifter Frank Chambers and Lana Turner as Cora Smith, the restless wife of a roadside diner owner. Their passionate affair leads to a plot to murder Cora's husband, followed by guilt, suspicion, and eventual justice. The novel had been published in 1934, but its content was considered so objectionable that Hollywood avoided it for over a decade. The central relationship, an adulterous affair leading to murder, violated multiple production code taboos. When MGM finally secured rights and began production, the studio had to significantly tone down the novel's overt sensuality while still maintaining the core story. Director Tay Garnett found clever ways to suggest physical attraction without explicit scenes. The film's most famous visual, Lana Turner dressed all in white when first seen by Garfield, created an iconic moment of desire without showing anything objectionable. Turner later recalled the costume designer Irene deliberately created that all-white outfit to look as provocative as possible, while technically remaining within censorship guidelines. Behind the scenes, the filming was complicated by Turner's tumultuous personal life and Garfield's frustrations with censorship restrictions. Garnett allegedly shot some scenes multiple ways, a tame version for censors, and a more suggestive version he hoped to include in the final cut. Most of the more provocative footage was ultimately discarded to secure approval. Critics recognized the film's power despite the compromises. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times wrote that it catches all the morbid fascination of the novel while still adhering to the dictates of discretion. The Catholic Legion of Decency gave it a B rating, objecting to its low moral tone, but stopping short of condemnation. The film performed exceptionally well at the box office, proving audiences were drawn to darker, more mature themes. Film scholar Janine Basinger later noted that the film represented Hollywood learning to suggest what it couldn't show, creating a template for adapting controversial literature while navigating censorship. By finding visual and dialogue substitutes for explicit content, The Postman Always Rings Twice demonstrated how filmmakers could address adult themes within the production code's constraints. Number 9. Forever Amber, 1947. This historical drama about a young woman's rise through English society via a series of affairs caused a nationwide furor, with boycotts in over 40 cities. Based on Kathleen Windsor's best-selling novel, itself banned in 14 states, the film starred Linda Darnell as Amber St. Clair, an ambitious 17th-century woman who uses her beauty to advance through Restoration England's royal court, becoming mistress to King Charles II. The novel had sold over 3 million copies despite its scandalous reputation. When 20th Century Fox paid a record $200,000 for the film rights, the studio knew controversy would follow. The Production Code Administration initially rejected the screenplay entirely, forcing extensive rewrites that toned down Amber's numerous affairs and added moral condemnation of her behavior. Even after modifications, the film remained provocative by 1940s standards. Director Otto Preminger, known for challenging censorship, included numerous suggestive scenes where the historical setting provided some cover for otherwise forbidden content. The film's budget ballooned to over $6 million as Fox invested in lavish sets and costumes to give the controversial story an air of prestige. The Catholic Legion of Decency issued a C rating, resulting in boycotts across America. In a rare move showing the Legion's power, Fox actually halted the film's release, added a prologue condemning Amber's immoral behavior, and recut several scenes before redistributing it. Cardinal Francis Spellman of New York personally denounced the film from the pulpit of St. Patrick's Cathedral, calling it a glorification of immorality and licentiousness. Critics were largely unimpressed, with the New York Times calling it a lush and lurid film that makes for tawdry drama. Despite the controversy and mixed reviews, Forever Amber became one of the highest-grossing films of 1947, earning over $8 million. The film's commercial success, despite organized religious opposition, demonstrated the weakening influence of moral guardians over audience choices. Film historian Thomas Doherty later called it a flashpoint in post-war censorship battles, noting how Fox's willingness to initially defy the Legion of Decency represented a significant shift in studio attitudes toward external censorship. While the studio eventually compromised, the very existence of such a film signaled that Hollywood was increasingly willing to test boundaries as public tastes matured after World War II. Number 8. Black Narcissus, 1947. This British psychological drama about nuns experiencing forbidden desires in a remote Himalayan convent was so visually sensual that American censors demanded significant cuts. Directed by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, the film starred Deborah Kerr as Sister Clodagh, who leads a group of Anglican nuns establishing a school and hospital in a former harem palace. The exotic setting, combined with the presence of a handsome government agent, triggers repressed emotions and memories in several nuns. The film's most controversial element wasn't explicit content, but its extraordinarily suggestive visual approach. Cinematographer Jack Cardiff used Technicolor to create heightened, almost feverish imagery that conveyed the nuns' psychological and physical turmoil. The climactic scenes with mentally unstable Sister Ruth applying forbidden red lipstick and later attempting to murder Sister Clodagh were filmed with an intensity that made their psychological breakdown feel disturbingly erotic. What many viewers don't realize is that the film's exotic Himalayan setting was created entirely in a British studio. The filmmakers never traveled to India, instead constructing elaborate sets and using matte paintings to create the vertiginous mountain landscapes. This artificial environment actually enhanced the film's dreamlike, hallucinatory quality, making the nuns' emotional crises feel even more intense and unnatural. American censors demanded numerous cuts before allowing distribution, particularly targeting scenes with Sister Ruth's breakdown and the flashbacks to Sister Clodagh's romantic past. The Catholic Legion of Decency gave the film a B rating, objecting to its suggestive sequences and inadequate motivation of religious life. Martin Scorsese later called it one of the first truly erotic films, noting how it achieved its effects through color, composition, and performance rather than explicit content. Film scholar Peter Cowie observed that Black Narcissus demonstrated how the most powerful censorship battles were shifting from content to treatment. Filmmakers could now suggest forbidden themes through artistic technique, even when the literal content remained within guidelines. The film remains a masterclass in using visual style to convey repressed passion. Number 7. The Bicycle Thief, 1948. This Italian neo-realist masterpiece created a censorship crisis in America not for political content or violence, but because of a single scene showing a child urinating on a street. Vittorio De Sica's landmark film follows Antonio Ricci, an unemployed worker who finally gets a job posting bills around Rome only to have his essential bicycle stolen on his first day. The devastating story follows Antonio and his young son Bruno as they desperately search for the bicycle through post-war Rome. The film's unflinching portrayal of poverty and desperation was revolutionary, shooting on location with non-professional actors to capture the harsh realities of post-war Italian life. But what caused problems with American censors was a brief natural moment where young Bruno needs to urinate while searching with his father, steps to the side of a wall and relieves himself. This simple human moment violated the production code's strict prohibition against showing toilet functions. What many don't know is that American distributor Arthur Mayer considered cutting the scene but was persuaded not to by influential critics who pre-screened the film. Instead, he developed a bold distribution strategy, bypassing the production code entirely by releasing the film without their seal of approval, targeting art house theaters that catered to more sophisticated audiences. The Catholic Legion of Decency, surprisingly, gave the film an A2 rating, recognizing its artistic merit and human values despite the controversial scene. Legion reviewer Father Patrick Masterson wrote, "The realism of this film occasionally borders on the borders of extreme frankness, but is never suggestive or offensive." Critics hailed the film as a masterpiece, with the New York Times calling it a brilliant, devastating drama. It won a Special Academy Award before the foreign film category existed, and was a success in urban art theaters, though it never received wide distribution in America. The film's treatment by censors marked a turning point in how foreign films were handled in America. Film historian Tino Baglio noted that The Bicycle Thief demonstrated the growing bifurcation of the American film market, with art house theaters emerging as venues where films could succeed without production code approval. This separate distribution channel eventually helped undermine the code's authority by proving that adult-oriented films could find audiences without conforming to its restrictions. Number 6. Red River, 1948. Howard Hawks' epic Western starring John Wayne shocked audiences with its unprecedented level of brutality and a homoerotic subtext that somehow slipped past censors. The film tells the story of Thomas Dunson, who builds a cattle empire and then leads the first cattle drive along the Chisholm Trail with his adopted son Matthew Garth. Their relationship deteriorates as Dunson becomes increasingly tyrannical, eventually leading to a violent confrontation. The film's violence was groundbreaking for its era. During the cattle drive sequence, Hawks shows men being trampled to death, drowning in river crossings, and engaged in vicious fistfights. Most shocking was Dunson's transformation into a despot who hangs deserters without trial and bullwhips those who challenge him, a level of brutality rarely associated with heroes in 1940s westerns. Behind the scenes, tensions emerged between the macho, conservative Wayne and the sensitive, method-trained Clift in his first film role. Their contrasting acting styles and political views created genuine unease that translated to screen chemistry. Hawks later claimed he deliberately fostered this tension, telling Wayne that Clift thought he was a poor actor and telling Clift that Wayne resented his stage training. What censors seemingly missed was the film's homoerotic subtext, particularly in the relationship between gunslinger Cherry Valance and Clift's character. In one famous scene, the two men admire and compare each other's guns in what film scholars have identified as coded intimate interaction. Ireland later said the scene was intentionally played with sexual undertones, remarking, "A lot more was meant than was shown." Critics praised the film's intensity, with Time magazine calling it one of the greatest westerns ever made. The film was a substantial commercial success, establishing Clift as a major star and showing a new dimension to Wayne's screen persona. The Catholic Legion of Decency gave it a B rating, primarily objecting to its violence rather than any underlying themes. Film historian Peter Biskind later noted that Red River represented the Western growing up, introducing psychological complexity and moral ambiguity to what had been a straightforward genre. The film demonstrated that audiences were ready for more adult themes in familiar genres, helping pave the way for the psychologically complex westerns of the 1950s. Its ability to smuggle in sophisticated themes under the guise of a traditional western showed filmmakers how genre conventions could be used to bypass censorship restrictions. Number 5. Rope, 1948. Alfred Hitchcock's experimental thriller about two young men who murder a friend was based on the infamous Leopold and Loeb case and contained homosexual undertones so obvious that censors demanded last-minute script changes. Starring James Stewart, John Dahl, and Farley Granger, the film follows Brandon and Philip, who murder their classmate David and then host a dinner party with the body hidden in a chest in the room, all to prove their intellectual superiority. Hitchcock's technical experiment of shooting in what appears to be a single continuous take created unbearable tension. Each 10-minute sequence had to be choreographed with precision, with furniture moving on silent wheels and walls sliding away to allow camera movement. The actors lived in fear of making mistakes near the end of these grueling sequences, knowing they would require complete restarts. The film's most controversial aspect was its obvious homosexual subtext. In the original play, Brandon and Philip were explicitly portrayed as lovers. While this had to be removed for the film version, Hitchcock deliberately maintained the implication through the actors' performances and domestic arrangement. Screenwriter Arthur Lawrence, who was gay, later confirmed the intention, saying, "The relationship between the two boys was obviously homosexual. We never directly stated it, but the camera looked at them in a certain way." The Production Code Administration demanded numerous script changes, particularly targeting dialogue that hinted at the nature of their relationship. Hitchcock complied on paper, but directed his actors to convey the subtext through performance, effectively circumventing the restrictions. Farley Granger later recalled, "Hitch told us exactly what was going on between Brandon and Philip, even though we couldn't say it in 1948. Critics were divided on the film, many finding it technically impressive but morally troubling. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times called it a stunt which is morbid and completely insensitive at its core. The film performed moderately at the box office, but below expectations for a Hitchcock production. Film scholar Robin Wood later identified Rope as one of the first Hollywood films to deal with homosexuality in any way that could be recognized by a general audience, noting that Hitchcock found ways to convey forbidden content through visual means and performance rather than explicit dialogue. The film demonstrated how a master filmmaker could address taboo subjects by relying on audience inference rather than direct statement, a technique that would become increasingly important as filmmakers sought to address adult themes under censorship. Number 4. The Snake Pit, 1948. This unflinching look inside a psychiatric hospital was so disturbing that 26 states considered legislation to reform mental institutions after seeing it. Olivia de Havilland stars as Virginia Cunningham, a woman who finds herself committed to a state mental hospital with no memory of how she got there. The film follows her treatment under Dr. Kick as she slowly recovers through psychotherapy while witnessing the horrific conditions endured by patients. Director Anatole Litvak insisted on realism, consulting with psychiatric experts and visiting numerous mental institutions during preparation. The film's title refers to an ancient treatment for mental illness, where patients were thrown into pits of snakes, with the shock supposedly curing their condition. The film's most powerful scene shows Virginia's horror as she suddenly realizes she's surrounded by dozens of severely mentally ill women in an overcrowded ward, a modern equivalent of the snake pit. What many viewers don't know is that de Havilland prepared for the role by secretly visiting mental institutions incognito with psychiatrists. She spent time observing patients without revealing her identity and underwent therapy sessions herself to understand the process. Her commitment to authenticity led to one of the most demanding performances of her career, causing what she later described as nervous exhaustion by the end of filming. The Production Code Administration initially rejected the screenplay for depicting mental illness too graphically and for scenes showing patient mistreatment by hospital staff. Producer Daryl F. Zanuck fought back, arguing the film would serve an important social purpose, and eventually secured approval after some modifications to the most disturbing scenes. The film received overwhelmingly positive reviews, with Variety calling it a standout drama of the highest caliber. Its box office success proved audiences would support serious films addressing difficult subjects. The National Mental Health Foundation praised it for bringing attention to psychiatric hospital conditions, while some psychiatric professionals criticized it for potentially deterring people from seeking treatment. The film's social impact was extraordinary for a Hollywood production. In addition to the state legislatures that introduced reforms, congressional hearings on mental health care cited the film as evidence of needed change. Film historian Marilyn Lester noted that the Snake Pit represented the emergence of the social problem film as a commercially viable genre, demonstrating that films addressing serious issues could succeed both critically and financially. By framing a social problem within a compelling personal narrative, the film showed how Hollywood could contribute to public discourse on important issues while still functioning as entertainment. Number 3. Stromboli, 1950. The volcanic eruption on screen was nothing compared to the eruption of scandal off-screen when star Ingrid Bergman's affair with director Roberto Rossellini became public during filming. This Italian neorealist drama stars Bergman as Karin, a Lithuanian refugee who marries an Italian fisherman to escape a displaced persons camp after World War II. He takes her to his home on Stromboli, a harsh volcanic island where she struggles to adapt to the primitive conditions and hostile locals. The film itself broke new ground with its neorealist approach, shooting entirely on location with mostly non-professional actors. Rossellini captured the actual eruption of the Stromboli volcano during production, incorporating this genuine natural disaster into the film's climax as Karin experiences a spiritual crisis while attempting to escape the island. The film's content was provocative for American audiences, particularly in its portrayal of a deeply unhappy marriage and Karin's contempt for local religious traditions. But what truly caused an uproar was the public discovery that Bergman, then married to neurosurgeon Peter Lindstrom, had begun an affair with Rossellini during filming and was pregnant with his child. Bergman, who had cultivated a wholesome image in films like Casablanca and religious dramas like The Bells of St. Mary's, became the center of a moral scandal that reached the highest levels of American society. The backlash was unprecedented. Bergman was denounced on the floor of the United States Senate by Colorado Senator Edwin C. Johnson, who called her a powerful influence for evil, and introduced a bill requiring actors to obtain morality permits before working. Theater chains refused to show the film, and Bergman's earlier films were pulled from circulation. She was effectively exiled from Hollywood for 7 years. Critics were divided on the film itself, many finding it difficult to separate from the surrounding scandal. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times praised Bergman's performance, but found the film a tedious and tenuous story. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned the film based both on its content and the circumstances of its production. Film historian David Thompson later observed that Stromboli represented the collision of European art cinema values with American Puritanism, noting how the scandal illustrated the gap between Hollywood's manufactured star images and the more adult approach of European filmmakers. The controversy demonstrated the risks when real life contradicted the carefully constructed moral narratives Hollywood had built around its stars. Bergman's eventual return to Hollywood and Oscar win for Anastasia would mark a significant shift in how personal scandals affected film careers. Number 2. The Oxbow Incident, 1943. This stark, unflinching Western about mob justice and lynching was so dark and morally challenging that 20th Century Fox executives tried to bury it after completion. Starring Henry Fonda and Dana Andrews, the film depicts a posse that hastily forms to hunt down 3 men accused of murder and cattle rustling. Despite the doubts of a few voices of reason, the mob captures and hangs the suspects, only to discover afterward they were completely innocent. What made the Oxbow Incident truly revolutionary was its complete subversion of Western genre conventions. Instead of heroic cowboys bringing justice to the frontier, it showed ordinary men descending into barbarism and murder when freed from social constraints. The film's uncompromising portrayal of collective guilt and moral failure was unprecedented in a genre typically built on clear heroes and villains. Most disturbing was how it implicated viewers by showing how easily normal people could participate in terrible acts. Director William Wellman fought constant battles with studio head Darryl F. Zanuck, who wanted a more conventional Western with a happier ending. Wellman reportedly threatened to quit if forced to compromise his vision. The film's production design was deliberately claustrophobic and stark, using harsh lighting and tight framing to create an atmosphere of moral suffocation. Wellman later said he wanted the audience to feel like they were being slowly strangled as the story progressed. The most powerful aspect of the film was its ending. After the innocent men are killed, Fonda's character reads a heartbreaking letter from one victim to his wife, written just before his death. This devastating scene runs several minutes without interruption, an eternity by Hollywood standards, forcing viewers to confront the human consequences of mob violence. Actor Dana Andrews later said that during filming, there wasn't a dry eye on set when Henry read that letter. Upon completion, Fox executives were horrified by the film's bleakness and gave it minimal promotion, considering it a prestige project to be quietly released for critical acclaim rather than popular success. Zanuck reportedly said, "This picture will lose money, but we have to make it to maintain the studio's artistic reputation." His prediction proved correct. The film was a commercial failure, despite running an economical 75 minutes. Critics, however, recognized its importance. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times called it a tense and powerful film, while the National Board of Review named it one of the 10 best films of 1943. The Catholic Legion of Decency gave it an A2 rating, acknowledging its moral seriousness despite the disturbing content. Film historian Robert Warshaw later identified it as the first adult Western, noting how it challenged the genre's mythology by showing the dark underside of frontier justice. Director Fred Zinnemann called it the film that made me want to make Westerns that dealt with real issues rather than fantasy. Its influence can be seen in the more morally complex Westerns that emerged in the 1950s and beyond. By refusing to provide the expected catharsis of traditional Westerns, the Oxbow Incident demonstrated that popular genres could be vehicles for serious moral examination, a revolutionary concept that would transform American cinema in the decades to follow. Number 1. Letter from an Unknown Woman, 1948. This emotionally devastating tale of obsessive love was so contrary to Hollywood romance conventions that it was rejected by American audiences and nearly destroyed director Max Ophuls' career. The film stars Joan Fontaine as Lisa Berndl, a young woman in early 20th century Vienna who becomes obsessed with concert pianist Stefan Brand. Her unrequited love spans decades, eventually resulting in a son Stefan never knows about, ending with her death and his belated recognition of her devotion through a letter. What made the film revolutionary was its complete inversion of standard Hollywood romance. Rather than showing love as a mutually fulfilling relationship leading to happiness, it portrays Lisa's obsession as a form of self-destruction. She rejects a decent man who truly loves her, abandons her own identity, and ultimately dies in pursuit of a narcissistic musician who barely remembers her. This bleak vision of romance as pathology rather than fulfillment violated nearly every convention of the genre. Ophuls' direction was extraordinarily sophisticated, using elaborate tracking shots, mirrors, and visual barriers to emphasize emotional distance between characters. One remarkable sequence shows the lovers' single night together entirely through a montage of Vienna fairground attractions, suggesting the artificiality of their connection without showing anything explicit. This technical virtuosity allowed the film to convey adult themes while remaining within production code guidelines. Behind the scenes, producer John Houseman fought constantly with Universal executives who wanted a more conventional, uplifting love story. Ophuls, a German-Jewish émigré who had fled Nazi persecution, insisted on maintaining the story's European sensibility. The studio eventually relented, but provided minimal marketing support for the finished film. Critics were divided. with some recognizing its artistry while others found it too pessimistic. The film was a commercial failure in America, though it received better reception in Europe. Its box office disappointment convinced Hollywood that Opals was uncommercial, effectively ending his American career. He returned to Europe, where he created several masterpieces before his early death in 1957. Film critic Andrew Sarris later called it the most European film ever made in Hollywood, noting how it challenged American assumptions about romantic love. Director François Truffaut cited it as a key influence on the French New Wave, admiring how it portrayed the cruelty of passion without moral simplification. The film's commercial failure but artistic triumph demonstrated the gap between Hollywood's commercial formulas and the more psychologically complex approach of European cinema. What's particularly fascinating is that the film passed the Production Code Administration with minimal objections despite its adult themes. By avoiding explicit content while exploring deeply mature emotional territory, Letter from an Unknown Woman represented a new type of challenge to censorship, one based not on what was shown, but on a fundamentally adult perspective on human relationships. As film historian David Bordwell observed, it demonstrated that the most significant censorship wasn't of images or words, but of ideas themselves. Though initially considered a failure, the film's reputation has grown tremendously over decades, now regarded by many critics as one of the greatest films of the 1940s. Its subtle subversion of Hollywood conventions and uncompromising artistic vision make it the perfect example of how some filmmakers manage to create deeply personal adult works even within the constraints of the studio system and censorship regime. For daring to tell a love story without the promise of happiness and fulfillment, Letter from an Unknown Woman stands as perhaps the most quietly revolutionary American film of its decade. Which of these controversial classics shocked you the most? Or do you think today's filmmakers have it too easy compared to these pioneers who risked their careers with every frame? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.